Hi guys, welcome back to Expo 2012. Now, joining us for a panel discussion on the topic of are Aussie gamers getting ripped off? We've got a few panel members who are going to discuss things like game bans in Australia, high game prices, and release dates. So we're going to go from my left. We've got Bryan Ma, who is you're a developer, right?
I'm an X2K developer. These days I freelance. Most of my experience has been in Asia. I'm from the States, so a bit of a outside perspective, I guess, on this panel.
Great. Now we've got Tracey Lien, who is a senior reporter for Polygon. Hello. And we've got Darren Macbeth, who is the managing editor of 5 Star Games and formerly managing director at Sega Australia for 5 years.
Yes, 5 years. And before that with Ubisoft for 7.
Okay. Now we're going to just kick straight into it. And we're going to look at, to begin with, we're going to look at Australia's place in the kind of global gaming industry. So things like, I just want to get your thoughts on how Australia is placed compared to the global gaming industry, how the other people in other territories view Australia and Australian gamers, and kind of where we sit on the whole scale. So Darren, I'll start with you because you've had a lot of experience in the local industry.
Yeah, look, I'll take it from here. Look, the global industry, Australia represents probably around about 3% to 4% of the global industry. So, you know, it's a small amount, but not too small. It's sort of in that mid-range. So of Europe, we're about 6 or 7% on a good year. So it's an important market for publishers. It's an important market because we do follow the trends of a lot of things overseas, so we can bring things here quite easily. So from a publisher's perspective, yeah, it's always important to get this market right. The gamers are very, very good. The people are, you know, receptive of the products. So from that perspective, yeah, we're, you know, from publishers, we're always looking forward to doing things in the Australian marketplace.
Do you think the Australian market is growing?
Look, at the moment, the whole industry isn't. We're in that cycle where, you know, it's now been 7 to 8 years that we've had the current generation, and you're always going to come off a curve with that. So with the new hardware coming out with the Nintendo, you know, Wii U in November, it's the start of the new cycle. So we get this dip before we go again. And if you look back through the years from, you know, PS1 to PS2, the exact same thing has happened. So where we are at the moment, we're in a dip. We're not dipping as much as Europe and some other territories. So, you know, the UK at the moment is down about 28%. The latest figures we've got is that we're down by around about 18 to 20. So we're not down as much as an industry, but it's still down. But it's the calm before the storm. You know, the new products coming through look amazing. Obviously, you've just had the Nintendo, you know, Wii U on it, and it's a brilliant machine. And look, it also brings in the start of probably 2-screen gaming, which is, you know, obviously with you know, Microsoft Smart Glass and obviously Sony crossplay. So yeah, I think we're on the dawn of something really, really big, and things going forward in a big way over the next like 3 to 5 years.
Cool. Now, Tracey, you cover the Australian market for Polygon. What do you think? What are your thoughts on like Australian gamers? Are they kind of ready to take up like new products and you know, new trends that come through? Are they really eager about that? You know, how do you see their place in the kind of global?
I think a lot of Australian gamers don't really think about Australia as a small place. I mean, they think of themselves as equals with those in America and in Europe because, yeah, we're a first world country, we've got the internet, we can do whatever we want. So they feel as though they deserve what the people in the US get, and, you know, so they should. So in terms of, you know, game releases, product releases, I definitely think that Australian gamers are ready to embrace that. In terms of game development in Australia, though, I think the past few years has seen a lot of big studios close. So I don't think that our game development scene is particularly healthy now from a commercial perspective, but I think we'll see changes.
Now, Bryan, you can talk a little bit about the game development side. So you, how long were you working in China for?
I worked in China for about 6 years, and that was pretty much the brunt of my. I spent a lot of time there because it's kind of the opposite. Like, while we talk about places like Australia being down 18-20%, the thing is in China, starting about 10 years ago, all the publishers started coming there. People first wanted to open up things like outsourcing hubs, which then turned into a realization that there are 300 million gamers in China playing games, and they wanted to get into the market. So it's actually quite good to be a game developer, like, who's willing to go out to China. Yeah.
So there's obviously a bigger market, and that's growing as well.
There's a huge market, and it's still quite insulated in a lot of ways. I think about something like 50% of games being played are still, are just purely internally developed. But things are converging more and more. More and more people are playing, like, for example, iOS games. The biggest iOS games in the market in China, in the Chinese App Store, are pretty much the same ones that are doing really well here. It's also the largest iOS market now in the world. While it's this huge market that's kind of been weaned on its own industry and its own tastes and everything else, there's a convergence where it is starting to be more like a situation like anywhere in the West where they're playing the AAA stuff and the stuff. Yeah, so.
Okay. Now, just before we go on to the next topic, we're happy to take audience questions. So if anybody has any questions, just come up to the front here and we'll get somebody with a microphone. So we're going to go on to our next topic, which is obviously a lot of gamers in Australia, when games are released, some of release dates don't really match up to other territories. We get some games later than other territories, and that's a common gripe for Aussie gamers. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, Darren, you've obviously know about this part of the industry. Why does that happen? Obviously, games don't have to be localized in terms of language. There's no trade sanctions or anything. So why is it that even with digital titles where there's no actual shipment, why are games coming out later in Australia?
Well, look, I would actually say that probably 99 out of 100 games that are released in the packaged format come out day and date, if not before. We have a Thursday release date here because of Thursday night shopping is quite big. Friday's the release date in the UK, and then the following Tuesday is normally the US. And a lot of the major titles come out global day and date on a Tuesday as well. So it really depends on what the title is and what's going on. I think the main products that have either been sort of late or delayed have all been sort of MMO products that have needed back-end systems to be able to run. So therefore, what you're doing is you're testing the markets like the US and Europe for stress tests and making sure it's running right, and then you've got to bring it to a Southeast Asian market, and there is localization within those as well. So geographically, of course, of where we are in some of those on some of those products, we will be behind. But I would suggest for the majority of gamers that are here, you're getting it day and date, if not sometimes before. So I sort of question, I'd like to sort of probably, happy to take questions from people as to certain games or certain publishers, but from my background, we've worked tirelessly over the years to make sure that we've got, day and date with a lot of things. We don't want people to go overseas. We want them to be here as soon as possible. So it's normally a technical reason. Other than that, they shouldn't be the case, in all honesty.
Tracey, do you find that when you're talking to people in the Australian market, that people do often complain about the fact that we're getting games later than other territories?
I think more often they complain about us not getting the games at all.
That's
something we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But the main complaint is either the pricing, like why is it so expensive? If the US gets it for $60, why are we paying $100? And that complaint is even more extreme in the online space. So, if you don't have to ship a copy anywhere, if it's digital, why is it more expensive? So I think that's the main complaint we see.
All right,
Actually,
so
I have a question.
go. Yes.
So, coming from an outsider perspective here, it seems to me like this could be entirely ignorant, but paying $60 in the States versus paying $100 in Australia, it seems like the sort of currency is sort of commensurate, and that it sort of makes sense. Is that not actually the case? Or?
I'll jump in here and just from the gaming side of it. Everything's got to be taken in consideration in context with wages. It's got to be taken into context with the general costs of doing business. A person at GameStop in the US will have to work for 10 hours to be able to afford a $60 game. A person from EB's here today will be able to afford it in 5 hours.
So minimum wage
what you've got to look at is the relativity of wages to the cost and how much you're working towards it.
Right.
We have a smaller base to be able to call from. We have a large area to cover to ship product to. We have a beast of a retailer of retail shopping centres called Westfields that lorded over all the retailers and have extremely high rents. So combine rents, combine wages, combine the physical trying to send stock from Sydney to Thargomindah and beyond. It's an expensive place to do business. To be able to release as many products as we can, throw in classification, throw in everything else, it's, as far as that's concerned, it's a bit relative. It's you've got to look at it as relative. What we also have is an Australian dollar that's at unprecedented highs, and we work in an environment where there's a lag effect of currency coming into the marketplace. We all set our currency 12 months in advance. If it moves, we're locked. If it goes down, we're locked. So these types of things have all got to be taken into consideration. Why is a Porsche $200,000 here and $100,000 in the US? There are a lot of products and a lot of things that are a lot more expensive. What you'll see now and what you're seeing at Christmas this year on is the publishers are being able to react and be able to make their businesses cater for that Australian dollar. So therefore you're seeing prices coming down quite dramatically. So when you take out taxes, the thing is it's always $60. It's always quoted as $60. It's $60 before state taxes. Where our prices are the price with taxes. So you've got again, people are quite happy to take a little small bite and a grab and use that as a headline. I don't think that we're, as the title suggests, I don't think we're ripping off gamers at all. I think we're providing a very good service, and we're bringing the products as quick to the market as we can.
So when gamers complain about things like game prices in Australia, there's obviously a lot of factors that kind of that there needs to be taken into consideration. So you've mentioned a few of those, but
digital.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with digital, obviously there is those factors don't really. There's I said again, there's no shipment costs or anything. And so on Steam, sometimes on the Australian store, stuff is still way more expensive than on the US Steam store.
Yep.
And so that just doesn't make any sense. And over someone like me who, and I work in the industry. So how does that?
Yeah. The reason is that we have a retail environment. If we wouldn't be able to put our games into EBs, into other retailers in Australia, for the same pricing as that digital in the US. It just doesn't work. So digital is such a small part. What you're trying to get is the tail to wag the dog. And it's not the case. Digital is less than 5% of all of our businesses. So it's retail is what we have to go after. So retail is it. Retail sets the price point, and we have a same retail price point. So what the retail price point is what the digital price point is, set here in Australia. Simple as that.
So is it correct to say that a company like EB, for example, can dictate what prices a publisher in Australia sets for their digital?
No, that's not the case. It would be a simple situation that if we had the price at a lower price in the US, they wouldn't stock the product here in Australia for the packaged goods.
So EB would just say, no, we're not stocking it?
No, because the pricing wouldn't be competitive.
Oh, I see.
So
okay.
We've got the local market has to have pricing that is equivalent. We can't have one part of the business, which is less than 5%, dictating what goes on for the rest of it. We've got to take into account the physical costs and the physical product. When that changes, and what you're finding is when it's purely digital and it's no packaged goods, I think as an industry, it's pretty well line ball.
Okay, we're just going to take some questions from the audience now. Do you want to just come up to just the front here and just... no? Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, my question, with DLC, for example, the Borderlands 2 Season Pass is $40 in Australia, yet $30 in the US on Steam. How do you explain that?
On a per publisher basis, I can't answer that question because that's all the pricing is set by individual publishers, and that's sort of a question for Take Two. I'm not trying to avoid that, but individual cases. I can talk about things that we sort of I've been involved with organisations that I have, but individual companies
Yep.
set their things,
Yeah,
it's a tough one to answer individually.
And Tracey, you and I have been reporting on this for a really long time, and on average we have seen game prices in Australia dropping, and if you do individually approach publishers about that, no one's really willing to speak out and say, yes, officially we've dropped the price, our recommended retail price by 20%. No one really is saying that, but we have seen that. So games are true. You're seeing AAA new releases generally lower, coming out at a lower price point than like 2 or 3 years ago. So have you found that when you've been?
Well, yeah, like a few years, like when the first Kingdom Hearts game came out, it was $130.
Just like it seems almost ridiculous.
Yeah, like now, if I were to see a game for $130, I would expect, jewelry with it or something.
At least, a console.
Yeah.
So obviously, why do you think, and maybe you have some insight into this, why do you think publishers aren't willing to come out and say, yes, hey, guess what, we have lowered the price of our games? Why don't they want, gamers to know that?
Oh, look, I think that it's, basically everyone's able to do their own business. We're not, conscious of a fact that it's not a cartel, and it's not what it is. Each person has their own ability to set their own pricing. Sega themselves, we're coming out with Sonic and All Stars Racing transformed at $49.95 day one for 360, P3 and that. Each one has their own ability to be able to do that. And I think people are reacting and doing what they can afford to do on a title by title basis as things roll through. So I don't think there's a big this is what we're doing. It's more a fact that on an individual basis, people are reacting and going, you know what, I can now afford to do this because my business allows to be able to sort of bring the currency and everything else into factor now, which it wasn't able to 12 months ago.
Now, is there another audience question?
I've just got 2 questions. So the first one is to Dan. Do you think that the current model where you're seeing a lot of costs and high prices here in Australia are because of things like distribution factors and whatever? But obviously we live in the global market now, so people are starting to buy more games, even physical copies of games from overseas.
Yep.
So not talking about digital downloads necessarily, but you can get copies of games overseas which will work here in Australia for much cheaper than here. In light of that, do you think it's still sustainable for the prices to be higher here in Australia than they are compared to those overseas competitors?
Yes, because if they aren't at the level that they are, we won't exist. We'll close up and go home. It's pretty simple. It's a business. We're not here to lose money, and at a certain level, you will, because we just don't have the population. And like I said, it costs a lot of money. The person that's in Karratha wants the product the same day as the person in George Street in Sydney. Do you know what that takes to do? Do you know how much it costs when there's only 2 courier companies in Australia that can do that? They're then you bring a lot of those factors in, you start going, okay, look, we realise, and everyone does, every retailer knows they work in a global environment now, and brands coming in. The reactions that people are having and what we can do. People will bring them down to a level which we can still sustainably make money, because it is a business, but it can also be a balance between making sure. We don't want people to buy from overseas. I can tell you we don't. It's not what we're there for. We're not trying to go, well, we want to do this and then let everyone buy from Oz Games or whatever it is. We're aware of every site. So we look at it and see. But like I said, it's more a react. What we've had in the past is a lag effect for a currency that has been at ridiculous levels and still is at a ridiculous level to what it has been over the last, 20 years. I remember when the Australian dollar was 43 cents at E3 one year, and I think I bought one beer and it cost me $15. No one talks about those times when the gaming prices were still at a level that were less than what they were in the US. We're just in a situation that we're going there. I can give you a lot from, unfortunately, a long time ago.
And the other thing is, I'd question how many people are actually buying their games from sites like playasia.com, because hardcore gamers, they're tech savvy, they know how to buy things online, but would your average family who wants to buy a Wii game for their kids go to PlayAsia, or would they just go to EB or Target or whatever? So I think a lot of gamers might have a skewed perception based on what they're exposed to, but the average game buyer, the parent who wants to buy a game for their kid, they're not necessarily going to shop online and buy from overseas.
we're not trying to, stick it to Australian gamers. It's far from that. All the people that work in this industry really love the industry and are really passionate about it. A lot of the people I've worked with for a lot of years, where we can and where we can put pricing at a level that makes sense for everyone and be competitive, we will try. Because, we have to report, or previously we had to report to people overseas. We have to do things, we have to sell numbers. If they're coming in from the UK and not going towards us, it doesn't make any sense. So it's a balance. As I said, it really is a balance, and we're working towards it. I think you'll find this Christmas, you've got some pretty good competitive environments, some good offers, great collector's editions, all those things that we're trying to give to the Australian gamer.
Now, Bryan, I just wanted to ask you, how does these kinds of complaints compare to a market like China? Like, what are prices there like, and do you find a similar kind of dissatisfaction?
I mean, it's a bit of a strange thing to compare the Australian games market to a place like China, where it really is like a different world. I mean, the Chinese game industry is something like an $8 billion industry, which puts it at something like 10% of market share globally, I think, something like that. It's still very insular, it's very new, it's maybe only about 20 years old. The online game market, the sort of web-based game market, this is the sort of predominant aspect, whereas there is no traditional retail market. And so publishers don't bring their stuff over to places like China because there's absolutely no way to monetize. People do play a lot of Xbox 360 games, people play PlayStation 3 games, but it's all gray market. This stuff is all
imported.
It's all imported, and there's no real distribution. And the other thing is, because it's all gray market, all of those machines are usually hardware hacked, and you buy a disc on the street for something like $1. So it's still like a sort of smaller set of the general Chinese gaming population that's into these sort of things, and they tend to be a bit savvier than the average Chinese gamer who's playing at places like internet cafes, and they're playing Western games like World of Warcraft and Counter-Strike and that sort of thing, but it's still a lot of locally developed games that are very specifically like built for their tastes and the market and the way that the Chinese government, like there's a Ministry of Culture that sort of regulates games there, so it's a very, very different situation. Yeah. So I mean, I would say it's hard to compare and say like, oh, they have it better or worse like as gamers. I mean, it's still insulated. Yes, they're not there. It's all pirated. It's getting better in terms that gamers are starting to get more exposed to the international scene, and that's, I think, what arguably is the most important. That's what would be most interested in. But I would say the only easy way to say something is better or worse in terms of the game industry in a place like China is that being a game developer is much better in China than being a game developer in Australia. Like that's a pretty easy one. There are jobs there, right?
Well, if we can talk about game development now, I guess, but and we have seen a lot of game development studios close in the last 3 or 4 years in Australia, but from the ashes of those, I guess, have come like a new breed of mobile developers, and mobile development in Australia right now is doing really well. And I guess I've talked to a lot of developers who think that that's really where the future of the Australian game development industry is headed. Have you found the same thing? Like Indian mobile.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be what's happening these days. And I mean, there are still AAA developers in Australia, obviously. There's the guys from Team Bondi doing their thing still, and there's 2K still has their base in Canberra, etc. But it does seem to be that's where people are sort of the most hopeful, right? Just in terms of like, oh, this is growing, we're doing well, etc. I mean, I kind of wonder though. I mean, there was a talk at a couple weeks back comparing this sort of nascent mobile and sort of mid-range studio scene to like Toronto a couple of years ago. But I actually missed that one. Were you there for that? This was
I can't hear you over Just Dance.
Oh yeah, Just Dance.
The beta of my existence. Mayor Shepard's talking about like comparing the scene here to Toronto and how it was really nascent, and now there's a really like thriving indie and like small scale scene there. And I don't know, do you think that's like a good comparison to be making?
Well, I think when a lot of the studios in Australia closed, a lot of the developers either went overseas, and those who stayed decided, well, let's try the mobile market. You know, it's low cost, anyone can get into it. But I think more and more developers are realizing that you can't bank on luck with the App Store. You can't just, you know, keep your fingers crossed that Apple will feature you one week. Because if Apple doesn't feature you, then good luck having a successful game.
Yeah.
So there are a few studios that are trying to break out of that now, and we are starting to see them think more long term and think in terms of a sustainable business model, as opposed to, you know, a couple of guys in their basement making an iPhone game and hoping it'll be successful. Yeah.
The other thing is that, you know, I've been involved with the industry. We had Sega Studios, and we still have Sega Studios here in Australia. They did the last Olympics game for Sega. The problem you've got is that the budgets are going up and up and up for console development. So if let's take where the current development is on say the platforms, and Australia now with $1 where it is very expensive to develop in, and also to manage it. When you're talking to try and manage $35-40 million, you want to be on their doorstep, and that's the problem. So it's actually distance that is a real issue when you're dealing with the budgets that are there. If you get a creative person though, such as the guys who were with Team Bondi, and they bought in, and and you know, people buy into their vision, then you can get it, but it's a bit rare for it to happen. And I think that's why the mobile route, people are going, you know what, I need to do it myself because that's how I need to keep my job.
Okay, now we're running out of time, so we're just going to quickly talk about classification, which is another big one for Aussie gamers. So everybody knows the R18 classification is coming into Australia on the 1st of January 2013, so next year. So we are getting an adult classification, but I think there are still a lot of questions surrounding what happens to games that have been previously banned, and also the new guidelines that were released. A lot of people have expressed concerns about, you know, whether we are still going to see games that will be banned, even though we will have an R18. So Tracey, can you give us a quick rundown on?
So if a game has been refused classification, like say Mortal Kombat, for example, it can be resubmitted for classification 2 years after the original classification. So I think Mortal Kombat was banned almost 2 years ago, a bit under. So when the classification, the R18 Plus comes in on January, they can resubmit it a few months later if they want to. Warner Brothers isn't obliged to. They will look at the Australian market and decide, you know, is it worth submitting it? Like, will there be enough people interested in buying the game? And if they decide that yes, there is enough people, then they'll submit it. What else?
But even if a game does get resubmitted, so the R18 classification will be in place, but the refused classification category isn't going anywhere. So the Classification Board of Australia, I guess, can still decide to refuse classification to a game if it thinks it exceeds those really high standards of like violence and impact and stuff that are in the R18 category.
Yeah, one of the complaints with the new classification is that a lot of people feel that it isn't really catered to adults. Like if you look at the wording of it, it's quite a conservative R18 plus classification. I mean, it includes the line, something to the effect of, you know, we have to protect the minors. And it's like, well, if it's an R18 plus game, it shouldn't be exposed to minors to begin with. Like, I feel as though the classification was written with children in mind, not with adults in mind.
I know what you're saying, and it does feel like that, but Darren, do you think that we've obviously, it's taken 10 years to get to this point, and it has taken the government 10 years to realise that adult gamers in Australia require an adult classification, and now that it's finally here, I feel like we should be, I mean, we've got it now. Do you think the guidelines are fair? And even though they do still point to this idea of protecting minors, the fact that we have taken those steps towards an adult classification, I think, is a really good thing.
Yeah, look, it is a good thing. I think that there are, if you look at some of the products that have an 18 or PEGI 18 or something such as that in overseas, they are an MA15 at the moment here in Australia. So I think maybe some products could have an R classification to give better information for parents to buy products. So that's one thing that I think is really good. I think from an information point of view, I think it's really good. I do believe we do need to, think of the children, to quote The Simpsons. So I do think there is something within that. the chances or the probability of some of the product that are coming out of being banned, I think, is really, really minor.
And we've only seen only an average of 2 games a year, less than that even, being banned in the last 3 or 4 years.
So look, I think that we'll be right, because there are still guidelines overseas that people need to advise to, and some huge markets like Germany, for instance, obviously, which has some fairly strict and sort of tedious guidelines that you need to go through. We, as game publishers, we don't want to push the boundaries to a level where the game is banned in 5 territories and we can't sell it. It's not in our interest. I think we need to just sort of see how it goes. It also comes down to the interpretation by the classification board and how they interpret those guidelines. So we haven't got anything yet. We can't actually, even if a game was being launched in February and we need to put that product into submission now, even if you thought it might have been an R classification, you actually can't apply for it until the 1st of January anyway. So we probably won't see the first R product until, say, the March, April time period, because we have to put it in to be classified to then have it certified to go through Microsoft and Sony and everything such as that. So we're not going to see till April, and then we'll see how it is. But I think it is a good, positive move, and it's something that is the industry, and I've been involved in it for 10 years. We're trying to get this changed. I think it's a victory. I think it's good for everyone. It's good information.
All right. Well,
I have to beg to differ.
Sorry,
I have to disagree a little bit there.
Disagree.
I mean, gamers have been fighting for a long time for the classification, which is why I think it's all the more disappointing that it turned out the way it did. I mean, there's a line in there that suggests that because games are interactive, they have a greater impact, and that should be taken into account. And it's like, well, where's the scientific evidence for that? I mean,
the classification. We're going to argue. No, the guidelines don't actually say that this is the case. They just say, well, the word "may" is used, so they may have a greater impact. And the reason why that is there is no evidence to suggest either way. So there's been quite a few studies done, but they haven't been large studies, or they've mostly been industry-funded studies as opposed to university studies, I think. And so there's still no kind of set viewpoint on where that is. And I think the government was just trying to be careful. But I do understand.
But I do wonder how that will be interpreted by those who classify games, like how much they will take that into account.
Yeah. You're right. Okay, well, we're going to open up to the floor for the last 3 or 4 minutes. If anybody has any questions, just come up here and we'll take some questions from the audience just before we wrap up. No questions? Okay. Do you want to just come around here if you... Okay, just... Yep.
That's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. What's the classification status on Aliens Colonial Marines?
Oh, look, we're still getting the final build in to be able to put it in for classification, but we believe from the current classification guidelines, it falls under MA15+. Okay. We had obviously Aliens versus Predator, which was initially banned and then overturned. We don't think this is, anywhere near that level, so we actually feel that we're fine sitting in the MA15+ category.
Okay, cool. And one last question before we go.
Will any of the new R8 games, will any of the old R8 games be returning in future years?
So the ones that have already been banned?
Yes, like Manhunt and things like
that.
Such
as, sorry?
Manhunt.
Only if the publisher resubmits it for classification. So, for example, Mortal Kombat Manhunt, when an R18 plus classification is introduced, they can be resubmitted, but if the publisher doesn't want to resubmit them, then we don't get them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Tracey. Thank you, Bryan. And thanks to everybody. And that's it. And now we're just going to go check out what people on the EB Expo show floor have to say about the show.